the president of our organization. I'm the vice president of the organization, and I'm going to replace my colleague, Mr. Dereziński, today. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome all of you, especially we have our foreign guests with us. We've already had a mini conference with us, and we've been able to communicate, but now we're going to have interpretation. I would like to welcome Mr. Filip Merix, the Vice President of Law, Mr. David Chmelik from the European Commission, the DG Budget. Well, we have many outstanding guests here. Professor Honfara, for example. But, well, since I have not really been prepared to welcome everybody individually, let me just mention our exceptional guest, Dr. Czesław Siekierski, the Deputy of the European Parliament. Dr. Siekierski has been the first European in Poland, because it was Let me justify the statement. When Dr. Siekierski was the head of FAPA, FAPA was the first one to publish the materials that have introduced us to the complex world of the European Union. Well, of course, also the achievements of Professor Majewski, whose materials we are going to use today, were of great importance. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference is one of many conferences, because the complexity of the common agricultural policy has always been a fact. When the founding fathers of Europe passed the Rome Treaty in 1957 in post-war Europe, hungry Europe, at that time there was a food deficit in Europe. Europe was able to satisfy its own needs in 80% only. And it was decided that 70% of the funds would be allocated to what we today call common agriculture policy. And the implementation of that policy started in 1962, and after 20 years it turned out that actually Europe started to have surplus of food. There was overproduction of butter, for example, situation in the 1980s. That demonstrated the efficiency and effectiveness of the common agricultural policy. Of course, that was combined with development of other policies like industrial development. We needed employers, and therefore it was possible to combine two objectives, to transfer people from agriculture to industry, at the same time developing industry. In the 1980s, the discussion started what to do with the policy in the future, and Max Schell's reform was discussed. The goal was to detach support provided to agriculture and agricultural production. The reform, Agenda 2000, was the next step, when we started talking about production of safe food in Europe in environmentally friendly conditions. And we also thought about supporting rural areas in order to diversify incomes. Let me draw attention to the fact that what is also important for this conference is the Luxembourg reform of 2003, when the main instruments to support agriculture were direct payments. And direct payments were separated from the structure and the size of agricultural production. In McSherry's reform, we talked about compensation for lost income. In the latter case, we're talking about pure direct payments. But at the same time, in 2003, there were certain requirements posed for the agriculture, like good production practices or animal welfare and environmental protection standards were defined. The so-called cross-compliance also was to be followed. The European Union was enlarged. The last enlargement was from 15 to 27 member states, and that led to greater need for the resources. On the other hand, the money available decreased. Previously we've been talking about 80% of the funds being spent for support of agriculture. Now it's approximately 35%. Another important element are the negotiations of the World Trade Organization, the Doha Round, where the partners say that the European Union should reduce the support provided to its agriculture, and it should also reduce the custom barriers. And this situation brings us to yet another challenge. For the years 2014-2020, we need to define the rules according to which we'll be able to provide support to agriculture, to the multifunctional nature of the agriculture, and at the same time we need to follow or meet the expectations of the negotiators of the World Trade Organization. So the question is how to provide relatively high support, but to avoid being accused of protectionism in agriculture. So maybe the concept of payment for public benefit would convince the negotiators that the support should be provided. The agriculture is supported, but in exchange for that, the public gets relatively cheap food, and at the same time activities are undertaken to protect the environment, the landscape, and generally the rural areas. Well, there are not enough funds. It's not the place for us to discuss the amount of funds. We've been participating in such a discussion for 3 years already, and we've been saying that the funds available for the common agriculture policy provided for in the EU budget do not take into account the needs of countries like Romania and Bulgaria. Well, we are also complaining, but what can the Romanians or the Bulgarians say? Their problems in agriculture are even bigger than ours. Well, in accordance with the agenda, I would like to ask for a brief video to be shown.